She abandoned that property 9 years ago. My son has been the one maintaining it. If anyone's the rightful resident, it's Craig, not some woman who couldn't even hold down a job stateside. That was my father, 67 years old, retired postal clerk, standing at a folding table in a fluorescent-lit HOA meeting room, reading from a manila folder he'd been building for years. I sat in the third row, hands folded in my lap. I didn't flinch. I didn't stand. I didn't say a word, because I had 108 receipts that said otherwise. Every single one stamped with my service number and the base code for Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti. One for every month I spent coordinating supply movements across the Horn of Africa, while my father told the neighbors I was a drifter who couldn't hold a job. They don't know that yet. Let me go back to the beginning. When I pulled into the townhouse driveway, 3 weeks before that meeting, the mid-Atlantic air sat on my chest like a wet towel. Late July in Virginia, the kind of heat that makes the asphalt shimmer and the tree line look like it's melting into the sky. I'd been stateside for 72 hours, 9 years overseas, and my first breath of home tasted like fresh asphalt and someone else's charcoal grill. No one was waiting. No welcome sign on the door. Not even a text from my father. There was a gray pickup truck parked in my spot, a truck I didn't recognize. The mailbox at the curb read Pemberton in block letters, but the first name stenciled underneath wasn't mine. It was Craig's. I walked up the front steps. My keys didn't work. I stood there for 11 seconds. I counted. In Djibouti, 11 seconds is how long it takes for a supply convoy to clear the gate checkpoint at Camp Lemonnier. I'd timed thousands of them. 11 seconds and you're through. Or 11 seconds and you've got a problem. This was a problem. The locks had been changed. Through the screen door, I could smell fresh paint. The walls I'd left off-white were now a shade of gray I hadn't chosen. A pair of men's boots sat by the door that wasn't mine. A jacket hung on the hook I'd installed the week before I deployed. I pressed my left hand into my coat pocket. The coin was there. I didn't pull it out. I just felt it, weight and warmth against my palm. I stepped off my own porch like a stranger and drove to a hotel. That was the last night I stood on that porch, without knowing exactly what had been done to me. Growing up in the Pemberton household meant being measured by what people could see. My father spent 31 years as a postal clerk. Good job, honest work. But Neville Pemberton treated that route like a federal appointment. He knew every neighbor's name, every property line, every piece of mail that crossed his counter. When he retired, he didn't slow down. He joined the HOA grounds committee. He became the self-appointed liaison for the block. He was the man people called when a fence was crooked or a lawn went too long between mowings. And he measured his children the same way he measured those lawns. By what was visible from the street. Craig was visible. Craig was 3 years younger, still local, working as a leasing agent at Praxis Property Group. Craig showed up to block parties. Craig mowed the lawn. Craig shook hands with the neighbors my father had spent 3 decades cultivating. I was the absence, the intense child, too quiet, too methodical, too precise. I earned my commission through ROTC at 22. I married a staff sergeant named Dale Pemberton at 26. No blood relation, just a coincidence of surnames that my father found embarrassing rather than funny. The marriage ended at 28. Amicable. Clean. The Army has a way of clarifying what's essential and what's not. By the time I was 31, I'd been promoted to captain, purchased the townhouse with a fixed-rate mortgage, and received orders for Camp Lemonnier. I told my father I'd be doing supply chain consulting for overseas government contractors. He said, "Sounds like something you'd do." Vague. That was it. No questions about the work. No questions about the timeline. No follow-up in 9 years. Some clients prefer discretion. That's what I told people who asked. And in my family, nobody asked. What I couldn't say, what I was never permitted to say, was that I was a major in the United States Army coordinating theater-level supply chain operations for Combined Joint Task Force, Horn of Africa. That I managed $180 million in annual supply movements. That the corridors I routed cargo through supported Joint Special Operations elements, whose names I will never speak aloud. That the movement schedules, the asset routing, the supported unit identities were all classified at a level that made small talk with my father. Not just uncomfortable, but impossible. Denial, I would learn, was their specialty. Not my denial. Theirs. My father hadn't just lost track of me. He'd rewritten me. He told the neighbors I drifted off after college. He told the HOA I'd abandoned the property. He told my mother, Diane, 64, retired school cafeteria manager, a woman who'd spent her entire marriage deferring to Neville's version of every story, that I sent money sometimes but wouldn't say where I was. Unstable. That was the word he chose. Not missing. Not deployed. Not serving. Unstable. And 4 years ago, when I was 36 and deep into an extended stabilization tour, Neville gave Craig a key he'd had copied without my knowledge from the spare I'd left in the kitchen drawer before I deployed. Craig moved in, changed the locks, repainted the walls, listed my address as his legal residence on his driver's license, paid the electric bill in his name, and nobody, not a single neighbor, not the HOA board, not my own mother, asked where I was. They had crafted this story carefully. 3 weeks after I returned, the HOA meeting was scheduled. I'd already retained Sandra Mitchell, civilian attorney, former Army JAG captain, specialist in military property protections, and the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Sandra had reviewed the mortgage records, 108 consecutive allotment payments, routed through my military pay, each one stamped with my service number and Camp Lemonier's base code. 9 years without a single missed payment. She told me to sit in that meeting and let the room talk itself into a corner. So I did. The meeting room was a rectangular box off the clubhouse lobby, fluorescent tubes humming overhead, folding chairs in rows of 8, a table at the front where Raymond Hall sat, the HOA board president, 59, retired civilian contractor, no military background. He had a water bottle and a legal pad, and the quiet authority of a man who believed property disputes were the most serious thing in the world. Neville sat in the front row, Craig beside him, both in pressed shirts. Neville had the manila folder across his knees. Craig sat with his arms crossed, and the particular expression of a man who believed righteousness was the same as being right. My mother sat 2 rows back, hands folded, eyes on the floor. On the bulletin board behind the front table, there were photographs from the last 4 years of neighborhood events. Craig at the block party, Craig mowing the lawn, Craig shaking hands with Raymond Hall at the annual cleanup. 8 photographs pinned to corkboard under a banner that read, "Our Community." Not a single one of me. I sat in the 3rd row, charcoal coat, hair pulled back, nothing flashy. Sandra sat to my left with a leather briefcase between her feet. My left hand rested in my coat pocket, thumb tracing the edge of the coin. Neville was called to speak first. He stood the way he always stood, shoulders back, chin tilted, the posture of a man who had spent 31 years being the most trusted person on his mail route and had never stopped performing that role. "Thank you, Raymond. I appreciate the board giving us time tonight." He opened the folder. "My daughter, Hollis, purchased the townhouse at 1147 Birch Lane 9 years ago. She left almost immediately. She told us she had some kind of consulting work overseas. No one has seen her at the property since." He paused. "Let that land. My son Craig has been the one maintaining that property. He's mowed the lawn. He's paid the utilities. He's repainted the interior. He's been a part of this community for 4 years. He's the one who shows up." 3 neighbors in the second row nodded. Hollis couldn't even keep a marriage together, let alone a mortgage. She plays at being important, but no one's ever seen proof. No one's ever seen a pay stub. No one's ever seen a letter. Nothing. He closed the folder and looked at Raymond Hall. "If anyone's the rightful resident of that property, it's Craig. Not some woman who drifted off after college and never came back." The room was quiet. Craig unfolded his arms and leaned forward, nodding once. Diane stared at the linoleum. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I folded my napkin. No. I adjusted the cuff of my coat. My hands stayed in my lap. My face gave nothing. The thing about silence is that it isn't always passive. Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. Craig stood next. He walked to the front table and laid out 3 items. A utility bill in his name, dated 14 months prior, a signed statement from a neighbor, Thomas White, 4 doors down, attesting that no woman matching my description had been seen at the property in years, and a printout from the post office showing no active USPS mail delivery under my name at the address. "I've been the one living there," Craig said. "I've maintained it, improved it. I'm listed at that address on my license. Hollis hasn't set foot in that townhouse in nearly a decade." Raymond Hall spread the documents across the table. He reviewed them slowly. Then he looked up, past Craig, past Neville, to the 3rd row. "Ms. Pemberton," he said, "do you have a response?" The room turned. 31 sets of eyes. My father's jaw tightened. Craig crossed his arms again. Craig stood first. He put his hands on the table. "I don't know what response she thinks she has. The property value went up 12% in the last 3 years. That's because of the infrastructure improvements in the corridor. I was there for that. She wasn't." He looked at the room. 3 neighbors were still watching him. I was still seated. 3rd row, hands in my lap. My left thumb pressed against the edge of the coin through the fabric of my coat pocket. The corridor rezoning was driven by a federal transit allocation routed through Milcon appropriations, I said. My voice was level. I didn't stand. Military construction funding. The property value increase isn't from your landscaping, Craig. It's from a defense spending bill. Craig blinked. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not with noise. It shifted the way a compass needle shifts when you bring a magnet close. A small, silent reorientation of where true north actually was. Craig opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. That doesn't... You can't just... Sandra Mitchell rose from the chair beside me. She opened the briefcase. She placed a single binder on the table. Sandra looked at Raymond Hall. Then she looked at the room. She nodded once. To me. I stood. I have 108 receipts that say otherwise. I sat back down. Sandra unclasped the binder. Sandra unclasped the binder and opened it flat on the table. Inside, separated by tabbed dividers, were 108 allotment receipts, each one printed on standard military pay documentation. Each one stamped with my service number. Each one bearing a 4-character base code in the upper right corner. CLDJ. Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti. One receipt for every month. 9 years. 9 years. Not a single payment missed. Not a single month late. Routed through my military allotment like clockwork, from a base on the Horn of Africa to a mortgage servicer in Richmond, Virginia, while my brother repainted my walls and my father told the neighbors I was no one. Sandra placed her hand flat on the binder. Mr. Hall, these are 108 consecutive mortgage allotment receipts issued through my client's military pay. Each one is stamped with her service number and the base code for the installation where she was stationed. Every payment arrived on time. Every payment is documented. There has been no lapse in ownership, no default, and no abandonment. Raymond Hall pulled the binder toward him. He adjusted his reading glasses. He turned to the first receipt, then the second, then the 10th. His finger stopped on the base code. CLDJ, he read aloud. He looked up. What is that? Camp Lemonnier, Sandra said. Djibouti, East Africa. It's a United States military installation. The room didn't react the way people react in movies. No gasps, no whispers. Just a slow, creeping stillness, the kind that moves through a room like cold water filling a basement. One neighbor in the second row uncrossed her arms. Thomas White, the man who'd signed the statement that I hadn't been seen at the property, leaned back in his folding chair and looked at the ceiling. Raymond Hall turned another page, then another. His thumb moved across the base code stamp, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure was real. These go back 9 years, he said quietly. Yes, sir, Sandra said. Neville shifted in his seat. The manila folder was still in his lap. His hand pressed down on it, as though anchoring himself to the only version of the story he'd ever told. Craig was watching Raymond Hall. His expression hadn't collapsed yet. It had tightened, the look of a man who can feel the floor tilting, but hasn't decided whether to brace or run. That was when the back door of the meeting room opened. Mr. Hall, Craig said, standing again. I don't know what those receipts prove. Anyone can send a check from anywhere. That doesn't mean she lived there. That doesn't mean she maintained the property. His voice had thinned. The certainty was draining out of the room like heat from an open door. 3 neighbors were still watching him, but their eyes had changed. She can, Sandra said. Mr. Hall, I'd like to direct the board's attention to page 4 of the binder, which contains a summary of the Service Members Civil Relief Act protections applicable to my client's property. Under federal law, a service member's property cannot be seized, reclassified, or subjected to adverse action during active duty deployment without a court order. No court order was obtained here. The vacancy notice your board issued has no legal standing. Raymond Hall removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, put them back on. He looked at the vacancy notice pinned to his legal pad, then back at the binder. Mr. Pemberton, he said, addressing Neville. Were you aware your daughter was serving in the military overseas? Neville's chin lifted. The reflex of a man who had spent decades being the authority on every question, asked within 6 blocks of his home. She told us she was doing consulting work, Neville said. Vague. Overseas somewhere. She never said military. She never showed us anything. No uniform, no paperwork. Nothing. He looked at the room. If she truly served, there would be evidence, photos, medals, a unit willing to back her up. Instead, we have silence. We have myth. He said the word myth the way you'd say stain. That's when it happened. My left hand was still in my coat pocket. During Neville's answer, I'd drawn the coin out without thinking. Not to display it. Not as a gesture. Just the habit of 9 years. When the pressure builds, you hold what's real. The coin sat in my open palm, resting on my knee. Bronze, worn smooth. The CJTF HOA crest barely visible under the fluorescent light. Raymond Hall didn't notice it. Craig didn't notice it. Neville was too busy performing his certainty to look anywhere but at the faces he was trying to convince. But when the back door of the meeting room opened, the man who walked through it noticed nothing else. If you've ever held proof of who you are while someone else tried to erase you, hit that like button and subscribe. And follow along for more stories like this one. The door didn't burst open. It opened the way a door opens when the person behind it has spent 32 years entering rooms where precision matters more than theater. A firm push, a measured step, the sound of hard-soled dress shoes on linoleum, not boots, not tonight, but shoes polished to a standard that made the fluorescent light catch them like glass. Brigadier General Douglas Ward, 56 years old. Class A uniform, green coat pressed to a razor crease, 1 star on each shoulder. Ribbons stacked 4 rows deep across the left breast, the kind of color arrangement that civilians can't read, but know instinctively means something heavy. His hair was silver at the temples. His posture was the posture of a man who had commanded soldiers across 3 continents and never once needed to raise his voice to fill a room. He stepped inside and stopped 2 paces from the last row of chairs. He didn't scan the room. He didn't greet Raymond Hall. He didn't look at Neville. He didn't look at Craig. He looked at me. His gaze moved to my hands, to my left knee, to the coin resting in my open palm. His expression didn't change the way a civilian's would. No surprise, no confusion. It tightened. The way a man's expression tightens when he sees something he recognizes from a life most people in that room would never understand. His right hand moved to his own coat pocket. A brief, unconscious gesture. The mirror of mine. He carried the same coin, the command variant. "Major Pemberton," he said. 2 words, my rank and my name. Spoken at a volume that didn't need to be loud because the silence in that room had already done the work for him. Raymond Hall's water bottle stopped halfway to his mouth. Craig's arms unfolded. His hands dropped to his sides. Neville turned in his chair. The manila folder slid an inch off his knee. He caught it. Barely. Diane, my mother, 2 rows back, hands folded, eyes that had been fixed on the linoleum for the entire meeting, looked up for the first time. Brigadier General Ward walked between the rows of folding chairs. He moved with the economy of a man who does not alter his pace for an audience. He passed Craig without a glance. He passed Neville without acknowledgement. He stopped at the 3rd row where I was seated. He extended his hand. To me. First. I stood. I took his hand. His grip was the grip I remembered from Camp Lemonnier. Firm, brief, precise. The handshake of a man who shook hands with ambassadors and field commanders and meant the same thing every time. "Sir," I said. He nodded once. Then he turned to Raymond Hall. "Mr. Hall, my name is Brigadier General Douglas Ward, United States Army. I'm here at the request of Major Pemberton's attorney." Sandra Mitchell gestured toward an empty chair at the front table. Ward didn't sit. He stood beside the table, facing the room. His ribbons caught the fluorescent light. The single star on each shoulder reflected like a period at the end of a sentence. No one in that room was prepared to read. "This woman is Major Hollis Pemberton, United States Army," he said. "She served under my command at Combined Joint Task Force, Horn of Africa for 14 months during a critical expansion of resupply operations across the theater. She coordinated supply movements across 4 nations, supporting operations you will never read about. She managed logistics valued at $180 million annually." He paused, not for effect, for accuracy. "She is one of the most capable officers I have served with in 32 years of service." He reached into his coat pocket. He placed his challenge coin on the table beside the binder. The command variant, slightly larger than mine. The same CJTF HOA crest, the same bronze weight. I placed mine beside it. 2 coins on a folding table in a fluorescent-lit HOA meeting room in Virginia. One carried by a soldier, one carried by her general. Side by side. The room didn't breathe. Raymond Hall stared at the coins, then at the binder, then at Ward's ribbons, then at the single star on his right shoulder. His legal pad sat untouched. The vacancy notice pinned to it looked suddenly like something from a smaller world. Sandra Mitchell opened a second document. "Mr. Hall, I'm entering into the record a sworn affidavit from Colonel Ellen Cooper, United States Army, Major Pemberton's former executive officer and direct superior at Camp Lemonier's Logistics Directorate. Colonel Cooper attests to Major Pemberton's continuous active duty service, her duty station, and her exemplary record over 9 consecutive years of overseas assignment." She placed the affidavit beside the coins. Neville's folder slipped from his hands. It hit the linoleum with a flat, papery sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Utility bills and the neighbor's signed statement fanned across the floor. He didn't pick them up. He stared at Ward's uniform, at the star, at the ribbons he couldn't read but understood, finally, the way a man understands a language he has spent a lifetime refusing to learn. Craig stood, then sat. His hands gripped the sides of his folding chair. The color had left his face in stages. First the cheeks, then the jaw, then the skin around his eyes, until he looked like a man watching the building he'd been living in condemned in real time. Diane's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands unfolded for the first time all evening and pressed flat against her knees, as if she needed to feel something solid beneath her. 3 neighbors in the second row sat perfectly still. Forks. No, there were no forks. But the stillness was the same. The paralysis of people who have just realized that every story they were told about the woman in the 3rd row was a lie. Thomas White, the neighbor who'd signed the statement, was staring at the wall behind Raymond Hall's head, as though hoping to disappear into it. Even the fluorescent tubes seemed to dim, their hum dropping to a frequency that felt less like background noise and more like the room holding its breath. Ward hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. He stood at the front of the room the way he'd stood in briefing rooms at Camp Lemonnier, with the particular stillness of a man whose authority was not a performance, but a fact. He looked at Neville. "Mr. Pemberton," he said, "your daughter served 9 consecutive years at a forward operating installation in East Africa. She could not tell you the specifics of her work. That was not a choice. It was a legal obligation. What she could tell you was that she was overseas, that she was working, and that she was paying her mortgage." He paused. "You chose not to hear that." Neville's jaw worked. No sound came out. His hands were flat on his thighs, fingers spread, the posture of a man trying to keep himself from sliding off the edge of something. "I didn't," he started. His voice cracked. "She never said she was in the—" "Major Pemberton," Ward said, turning back to me. His voice shifted, warmer by 1 degree. The difference between addressing a room and addressing a soldier. "Ma'am, your attorney has the floor. I'll defer to her for the legal proceedings." He stepped to the side. He did not sit. Sandra looked at Raymond Hall. "Mr. Hall, to summarize, my client purchased the property at 1147 Birch Lane 9 years ago. She made 108 consecutive mortgage payments from an overseas military installation. Her father provided an unauthorized copy of her house key to her brother, who occupied the property without consent, changed the locks, and listed the address as his own. The vacancy notice issued by this board was filed without any attempt to verify ownership through the county recorder's office, the mortgage servicer, or the United States military allotment system." She closed the second document. "We are requesting immediate rescission of the vacancy notice, a formal written apology from the board, and confirmation that my client is the sole legal resident and owner of the property." Raymond Hall removed his glasses. He set them on the table beside the 2 challenge coins and Colonel Cooper's affidavit and 108 receipts from a base most people in that room couldn't find on a map. He looked at Neville's folder on the floor, the utility bills, the neighbor's statement, the mail printout, evidence of a story that had never been true. Then he looked at me. "Major Pemberton," he said. The rank came out carefully, the way a man says a word he's using for the first time and wants to get right. "Ma'am, on behalf of the board, I want to—" "Mr. Hall," Neville's voice, thin now, stripped of the authority he'd carried into the room. "She never told us. You have to understand. She never said she was—" "Dad." Craig's voice, barely above a whisper. His hand was on Neville's arm, not in support, in warning. The grip of a man who has just realized the foundation he built his house on belongs to someone else. Neville stopped. His mouth stayed open. His eyes moved from Ward to the coins on the table, to the binder full of receipts to me. And for the first time in 9 years, my father looked at me. Really looked, and had nothing to say. Hollis speaks. Voice level. No tremor. No rise. "You didn't want to know where I was, Dad. You wanted me gone. Those are different things." The words landed on the room like a stone dropped into still water. No splash, just the slow, widening rings moving outward through 31 people who had spent 4 years believing a retired postal clerk's version of a story he never bothered to verify. Neville's mouth was still open, the shape of a rebuttal without the sound. His fingers twitched against his thighs, the posture of a man reaching for authority that had already left the building. "I didn't—" "She never said she was—" "You didn't ask." 3 words. My voice didn't waver. My hands stayed in my lap. I looked at my father the way I'd looked at supply manifests that didn't reconcile, with the patience of someone who already knows where the discrepancy is and is simply waiting for the numbers to confess. 9 years, I said. 108 payments. Not one phone call from you asking where the money came from. Not one letter asking why the mortgage was current on a property you told everyone I abandoned. You didn't want the truth, Dad. You wanted a confession. You wanted me to be the daughter who failed, because that was easier than admitting you never looked. Neville swallowed. His chin dropped half an inch. For a man who'd spent 31 years holding it at exactly the right angle for every neighbor on his route, that half inch was a demolition. Hollis, Diane's voice. My mother. The first word she'd spoken all evening. It came out cracked and uncertain, like a door hinge that hadn't been turned in years. I looked at her. She was sitting 2 rows back with her hands pressed flat against her knees, the same posture she'd held through every dinner, every argument, every moment when Neville spoke and she listened, and the distance between hearing and believing collapsed into the same silence. Mom, I said, I'm not angry at you. That was the truth. I wasn't. Anger requires the expectation of something different. I had stopped expecting something different from Diane Pemberton when I was 26, and she didn't come to my wedding because Neville said it would send the wrong message about a marriage he hadn't approved of. I'm not angry at you, I said again, but I'm done explaining. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. The way you stand when a briefing is over and the next task is already forming in your mind. I buttoned my coat. I placed the challenge coin back in my left pocket. The bronze settled against my palm like a handshake from a life these people would never enter. Brigadier General Ward remained standing at the front table. He hadn't moved. He watched me the way a commanding officer watches a soldier complete a task with precision, not with surprise, but with the quiet confirmation that the standard was met. Sandra Mitchell gathered the affidavit and closed the binder. She left it on the table. 108 receipts. They could sit there all night for all I cared. They'd done their work. Mr. Hall, Sandra said, we'll expect the board's written response within 5 business days. Raymond Hall nodded. Slowly. He looked like a man who had walked into a property dispute and walked into something else entirely. His legal pad was untouched. The vacancy notice pinned to it was already a relic of a world that had ended 20 minutes ago. The board will rescind the vacancy notice, he said. Unanimously. I'll have the formal apology drafted and delivered to Major Pemberton's attorney by end of week. He looked at Craig. Mr. Pemberton, you have 30 days to vacate the property at 1147 Birch Lane. Craig didn't stand. He didn't argue. His hands were still gripping the sides of his folding chair, knuckles white. The righteousness he'd carried into the room had drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. Slowly at first, then all at once. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man signing something he knows he can't contest. Neville didn't nod. Neville didn't move. He sat in the front row of a fluorescent-lit meeting room with his manila folder on the floor and his utility bills fanned across the linoleum and his entire narrative scattered around his feet, like leaves from a tree that had been dead at the root for years. I walked toward the back door. Brigadier General Ward fell into step beside me. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. The way officers walk when rank is acknowledged, but respect is mutual. At the door, I stopped. Not because I had something left to say, because my mother was watching me from the second row, and her eyes were wet, and her hands were still pressed flat against her knees, and I wanted her to see me leave upright. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I held her gaze for 3 seconds, the same 3 seconds it takes to verify a supply manifest signature at the end of a 16-hour shift, and then I walked out into the Virginia night. The air was still heavy. Mid-Atlantic summer doesn't let go just because the sun does, but it felt different on my skin than it had 3 weeks ago when I'd stood on my own porch like a trespasser. It felt like something I'd earned the right to breathe. Ward walked me to the parking lot. He stopped beside my rental car. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he extended his hand again. Baseplate 6. My call sign. The one that had moved across secure channels for 14 months during the theater expansion. The one attached to supply, corridors that kept soldiers alive in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. He said it like a name. Because it was. Sir, I said. You handled that with more restraint than most officers I know would have managed, he said. Including me. I almost smiled. Almost. Logistics is patience, sir. You taught me that. He released my hand. He nodded once. Then he walked to his own vehicle, a dark sedan with Shaw Air Force Base parking stickers on the windshield, and drove away without looking back. That was Ward. Economy of motion. Economy of words. The hallmark of a man whose authority had never required decoration. I sat in the rental car for 4 minutes. I didn't start the engine. I held the challenge coin in my left hand and pressed my thumb across the letters. CJTFHOA. 9 years compressed into 7 characters on a piece of bronze that weighed less than a house key. There is power in patience. There is freedom in truth, even if it comes late. Sandra filed the civil harassment complaint the following Tuesday. Neville Arthur Pemberton named respondent. The filing documented 4 years of unauthorized property access, defamation to neighbors and the HOA board, and the distribution of a copied house key without the owner's knowledge or consent. Neville retained an attorney. His attorney advised him to settle. Neville, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, had nothing to say at the hearing. The settlement included a permanent no-contact provision regarding the property at 1147 Birch Lane, and a written acknowledgement that his statements to the HOA and neighbors regarding Hollis Pemberton's residency and employment were false. Craig vacated on day 27. He left the walls gray. He left a dent in the hardwood where he'd dragged a couch without lifting it. He left a forwarding address with the post office. Praxis Property Group, the leasing agency where he worked. He did not leave a note. He did not call. Neville's reputation on the block unraveled the way all carefully constructed fictions do. Not with a single dramatic collapse, but with the slow erosion of every handshake, every wave across the fence, every morning greeting that had been built on the assumption that the man giving it was trustworthy. 3 neighbors who had nodded during his speech at the meeting stopped nodding when they saw him on the sidewalk. Thomas White, the man who'd signed the affidavit, removed his name from the statement in writing and delivered the retraction to Sandra Mitchell's office in person. The HOA Grounds Committee accepted Neville's resignation without comment. Raymond Hall, the board president, sent the formal apology by certified mail. 2 pages, signed by all 5 board members, addressed to Major Hollis E. Pemberton. It arrived on a Tuesday. I read it once. I put it in the filing cabinet beside the 108 receipts. Diane called in October, 3 months after the meeting. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. She didn't say much. She said she was sorry. She said she should have asked. She said, "I'm proud of you." No conditions, no advice, just that. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her I loved her. I did not invite her over. Not yet. Some doors opened slowly. That's not cruelty. That's architecture. I did not attend Thanksgiving that year. Not out of spite. Not out of pride. But because I no longer needed to sit at a table that had no place set for me. 8 months after the board meeting, I stood in the finished basement of 1147 Birch Lane. The gray paint Craig had chosen was gone. The walls were warm white, the color I'd picked 9 years ago. A desk sat against the far wall, a filing cabinet, 2 chairs for intake interviews, a laptop connected to the VA's housing referral network, a printed list of 35 families served in the first year, pinned to a corkboard that held no block party photos, no lawn mowing commendations, no evidence of performance. Just names. Just need. Just work. A small plaque hung beside the front door. Bronze, because bronze is what you earn and what you carry. It read, Baseplate Resource Center. No rank on the plaque. No medals on the wall. No ribbons, no stars, no framed certificates of appreciation. Just Hollis. I work from that basement now. Veterans call, families walk in. I coordinate housing referrals and transition resources with the same precision I used to coordinate supply movements across 4 nations. The scale is different. The stakes are the same. A family without shelter is a logistics problem with a human face. And I have spent 18 years learning that the solution is never volume. It is accuracy. It is consistency. It is showing up 108 times when no one is watching and expecting nothing in return, except that the numbers reconcile. Silence had always been the language of my life. My father heard it as absence. My brother heard it as surrender. The neighbors heard it as proof that I didn't exist. But silence was never empty. It was full of classified corridors and midnight manifests and the weight of a challenge coin pressed smooth by years of holding on. Silence was the sound of $180 million moving through the Horn of Africa without a single lost shipment. Silence was the sound of a mortgage payment arriving on time from 8,000 miles away. Silence was the sound of a woman doing her job while her family erased her name from the mailbox. Some wars aren't fought with fists. They're won in what happens next. I am no longer missing. If you enjoyed this story about quiet competence winning over loud arrogance, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one.